What I'd like to do is talk about all the kinds of narrative archetypes that pop up in Elden Ring, with a specific focus on Judeo-Christian themes. There will be some overlap with other types of mythological stories, but that is to be expected. When we look at the themes and stories that play out in Elden Ring, we will explore how they are both similar and different from some Judeo-Christian beliefs, and also how some of those stories exist across time in more than just the Bible. From Software's previous titles, namely the Dark Souls games, have some really incredibly well-crafted story beats that reference common archetypal ideas, both Judeo-Christian and not. I want to make a video about those games as well, but for now we are talking about Elden Ring, though I'll definitely be making comparisons to at least the Dark Souls story as well because of some similarities. One last thing I want to preface is that I'm no expert on Elden Ring's lore. I know a lot about what's going on, and even more so after making subsequent videos, and enough to satisfy my understanding, but given the nature of From Software's confusing and indirect world building, I'm gonna definitely get some things wrong, and some things are gonna be seen differently than maybe other people do. We're going to start out by doing an overarching analysis of the main game, then we're going to proceed into a brief analysis of the story of Miquella and his actions in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and then we're going to be finishing up with an analysis of the duality tropes and themes of twos in Elden Ring. With that said, and without further ado, I'd like to get into this. I'm not going to be going in any particular order. I'm going to approach it sort of in the order in which you encounter areas and learn things about in the main game, but definitely going to go off on tangents with each piece to cover whatever is necessary. There's no better place to start than with the opening cutscene, where we first learn about what's going on in the lands between. There's a lot of details here, and I'll get into the specifics of all the demigods more so later on. We have the setup of a pretty classic story here, with the introduction of a parental power figure in Queen Marika, and then in the squabbling for power among her offspring. It is reminiscent of Norse and Greco-Roman mythology, as well as the story of the patriarchs in Judeo-Christian tradition. That's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Specifically, we have a focus on a queen mother, which is pretty traditionally different, because the feminine is usually used as a symbol of nature and chaos, and a singular father figure is usually holding all the children together. That's the Jewish god, or Zeus, Odin, or Osiris. We'll learn more about this as we go on in the game's story, and that may shed more light on the usage of a queen here. We also learn that this takes place in a space called the Lands Between. This is a pretty common trope in From Software's work. In Dark Souls, you are transported from the land of men to basically the land of the lords, a place specifically for them. Dark Souls is a fight upward through the land of the gods. However, in Elden Ring, we are dealing with something that I think is more similar to Earth. It is the land between, just like Earth is, maybe a realm that exists between heaven and hell, or between Mount Olympus and Hades. The gods come from outside to rule the lands of men. This idea alone makes the demigods seem like angels and demons fighting over control of the earth. There was a war between the demigods, fighting for power, essentially. The Elden Ring throughout the game is a sheer representation of power. Even in pieces, it gives the demigods enough power to all betray one another over it. Then, we are told that this war led the demigods in the Lands Between to be abandoned by the Greater Will. The usage of religious terminology in all of From Software's games is no coincidence. They're utilizing those concepts on purpose. This is equatable to the will of God. So in fighting for power, those in the Lands Between have been abandoned by God, much like the Israelites are threatened with when they are disobedient to God in the Old Testament. Next up, we learn about the Tarnished, and get another more specifically Judeo-Christian religious reference: grace. Long-lost grace, guiding grace, golden grace, grace which blesses. The grace of the greater will, the grace of God. The concept of grace in the game specifically calls to mind the Holy Spirit to me. It is something which guides people in the correct direction, though if they are overcome by the state of the world, they lose it and are no longer able to see it working in their lives. Something else comparable might be faith. In the beginning of having faith, it is a fire working inside someone. The sights of grace we light are reminiscent of fire. But if the person with fiery faith is exposed to the true state of the world, they may slowly lose their faith and lose sight of the meaning of life. They become tarnished, tainted by the forces of the world. No hope, no faith, no grace. So we are specifically told that a tarnished of no renown is then blessed with grace once again and bid to come to the Lands Between. And that's where we begin, fire ignited or reignited, to do the bidding of the greater will. When we arrive in Limgrave, it is the start of the story. We are greeted, straight out of the gate, at the first sight of grace, with our first temptation, our first indication as to the corruption of the land. His name is Vare, and we don't know it then, but he is a servant of Mohg, Elden Ring's satanical figure. I'd like to hold up that Mohg is still Elden Ring's satanical figure, even though they sort of do a gotcha later on in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC and say that he was essentially a red herring satanic figure. I'm still going to keep the terminology in this video about how Mohg is essentially meant to represent this satanic idea. We'll get more to Mohg later, but I think it's important to note that much like Adam and Eve, we're introduced into this beautiful landscape of Limgrave that at first glance looks perfect and peaceful, like the Garden of Eden, and then we're immediately introduced to a representative like the Serpent, who tells us that he is the alternative option. For now, follow the guidance of grace, but don't forget about Vare, who gives you another option. Upon exploring Limgrave, it's obviously not Eden. It is perhaps the last corner of the world that is not entirely corrupted and fallen apart, though it still pretty much is. The following of the grace leads us to Stormveil Castle, the home of the demigod Godric. Before getting too close, we're stopped by Margit the Fell Omen. Once again, we'll talk about the omens in more detail, but they are considered a literal bad omen, sort of like a sign of how bad things are. They remind me very strongly of lepers, which are mentioned a lot in the Bible, for example. Margit attempts to snuff out our flame of ambition before we get too far, but if you manage to beat him, then you have been weighed in the balance and found suitable to continue. Despite looking relatively nice on the outside, the castle is in degradation inside. The unfolding story is that Godric, through a horrific process called grafting, is using other beings to make himself more powerful. Godric much seems to display the deadly sin of envy. Being the lowliest of the remaining demigods, he is essentially insecure and doing everything he can to display his greatness to his predecessor Godfrey. It is to call to mind the lowest of gods from the Greek, Norse, and other pantheons, who try to compete with their stronger and more recognized brethren. In fact, in order to have a fighting chance, he grafts to himself a great dragon to give him more firepower. Dragons are always displayed as ancient and powerful in FromSoft games. In Judeo-Christian theology, serpents are associated primarily with evil and the devil and his angels. In many instances, the demon commonly associated with the sin of envy is actually Leviathan, the massive biblical sea serpent. You can see this occurrence as Godric giving himself over fully to evil, calling no longer upon the greater will or the Erdtree, but rather upon the ancient evil, the wise and cunning serpents, the flames, to help him, and it still only results in his demise. In relation to Stormveil and Godric, it's worth mentioning that a devoted explorer will find their way to the bottom of the castle's lowest depths, where they can discover the horrifying body of Godwyn. They may not know that at the time, but we'll discuss Godwyn's stories a little more later on. After conquering Stormveil, we progress out of the last standing corner of a familiar world and into Liurnia of the Lakes, a waterlogged valley and home of the Raya Lucaria Academy. The entirety of the area seems to be sinking into water, though I can't really tell you why. It makes me think somewhat of the state of creation in Genesis 1, with darkness and deep waters covering the earth, or the global flood. This doesn't really fit, but the theme of water and depth fits all around the story of the area, of Raya Lucaria and Rennala and Ranni. Raya Lucaria Academy and its correlatives are studiers of sorcery, and thereby developers of intelligence. There's no better time than this to address the separations of the trees of faith and intelligence in most of From Software's flagships. This is typical of fantasy RPGs of all kinds, like Dungeons & Dragons. It's not a statement that faith and intelligence are different attributes, but rather a characterization of two types of skills. Something like the differentiation of the natural and the supernatural in our real world. Intelligence is the practice of sorcery and the casting of spells. It explores natural arts, not strictly anti-supernatural, but that it draws its power from the natural ideas of the elements often. Its basis is in our own real-world ideas of witchcraft, astrology, and things we might call New Age practices now. Faith, on the other hand, focuses on belief in supernatural powers, which results in the ability to perform miracles or incantations. It may result in similar outcomes to the practice of sorcery, but totally draws on a different source. I've always enjoyed the inclusion of these types of concepts in fantasy because they pull so strongly on dramatized versions of very real ancient concepts. Of course, this bleeds into our Judeo-Christian discussion. We see in the Old Testament the use of many of what might be called pagan practices, but still showcase power versus the miracles of the truly faithful. The Jewish person or the Christian would believe this is evil power, whereas in our From Software setting, neither seems to be necessarily preferable from the other. In fact, in most of the games, but looking at Elden Ring specifically, players are encouraged to use a mixture of both intelligence and faith to access many skills and abilities in the game world. This in mind, Liurnia of the Lakes is a land of the School of Intelligence. Above the sunken civilization, floating in the sky, is the Grand Hogwarts of Raya Lucaria Academy. Raya Lucaria and Liurnia are or were the domain of a family of witches headed by Rennala the Full Moon Queen. This is a very common archetype, the association of a woman associated with night and moonlight and space. On one note, it ties together the idea of the practices of intelligence and magic being associated with astrology, space, and moon, and such like that. And on another, it calls to mind the concept of the Queen of Heaven from the Old Testament. This god or goddess is identified primarily as Ashtoreth, a culmination of a goddess of Babylonian and Sumerian beliefs and deities of other ancient peoples. Overall, it is an association of the feminine chaos with the night, intelligence in opposition to day, and even in the spells and incantations in the game, the intelligence spells are usually derivative of space and star and moon and water and night, while faith represents more so ideas of day, fire, lightning, and sun. Rennala will be lightly mentioned in discussion of Radagon later on. For now, the player does find upon defeat of Rennala that she's no longer the powerful queen she once was, and is instead a projection or something of the sort cast by Ranni the Witch, her daughter. If the player ventures through the Carian Manor, they can meet Ranni and follow her quest. She ties into the same archetype obviously, though playing a bigger role in the story of Elden Ring at large. To say again, Elden Ring is obviously not a typical picture of right and wrong, so the archetypes of what is good and what is evil are pretty unclear. But Ranni's ending results in the extermination of the Golden Order and the grace of the Greater Will, replacing it with an Age of Stars and the Dark Moon, which would be a victory of night over day, a victory of chaos over order, a victory of femininity over masculinity. Typically, but not necessarily, any of those things in Elden Ring's context. But Ranni's entire quest is a progression of derailing the intended plot with her own devices, giving mind to the concept which this female archetype represents, the woman of night who interferes with the established order to conspire and bring chaos to bear. The idea of the Dark Moon and Age of Stars and darkness also seems similar to the idea of the Abyss and the primordial chaos of the darkness over the face of the deep, which sinking Liurnia also represents, as I mentioned. Before passing directly into the next and primary area of the game, the Altus Plateau, there's some other ground to cover, some underground. The two first beautiful underground river valleys are sort of an inverse of the typical idea of an underworld. Some later underground areas will be more typical. When riding the elevator down for the first time and seeing just how low it was going, I was initially reminded of the idea of Agartha, sort of a secret underground civilization that is more beautiful and abundant than the above ground, kind of journey to the center of the earth. The whole area of the first river valley has a very Native American-esque vibe to it. Spiritual types of beings who are one with nature, in almost a forest under an underground night sky, all the way to the ancestral spirit of the great deer creature. This is also related to the game's Norse mythology, which has comparable concepts. It's not especially mainstream, but ancient Jewish supernatural theology also held similar ideas. The concept of Sheol and other ancient Judaic concepts of the underworld and realm of the dead were often regarded as being literally inside the earth, comparable to the Agartha idea. The Mountain of Hermon, which is the location in the New Testament known as Caesarea Philippi, is often considered the location from which the forces of the under-earth come into the overworld. From a Christian theological perspective, it's not really knowable whether this is a literal or more spiritual in nature. This plays in more so as we continue through the subterranean world of Elden Ring. We'll address the remainder of underground sections before getting back to Caelid. After completing the underground forest areas, they trail into the underground night cities of Nokron and Nokstella. The night and moon symbology ties directly back to Ranni and Rennala and the school. The fact that it's underground and hidden in nature seems also to tie into the underworld concepts. More interestingly is the progression from here to Deeproot Depths and the Lake of Rot. FromSoft uses the concept of underground trees and roots quite heavily in other properties like Dark Souls as well. Trees are symbols of life and interconnectedness, and they perpetuate symbolism in religious, mythological, and narrative traditions. The Erdtree is the symbol of life and good fundamentally in Elden Ring, even with the genre subversions. If we assume the deep roots to be the roots of the Erdtree, or at least the minor Erdtrees themselves, this is interesting. It seems to point to the most central thing having a foot in both the good and the bad, the overworld and the underworld. Life, centrally, is part of each thing. The good has its antithesis in the bad. The Lake of Rot is finally the most stereotypical, if you will, of the underground areas. It is most similar to the traditional idea of hell, though somewhat subverting the more common FromSoft underworld of fire and brimstone. The Rot is more bright in red, and rot is a common theme in the game we can begin to address now. Because the game uses so much natural symbology drawn from Norse mythology, such as these beautiful and natural landscapes, the trees, forests, and rivers, the enemy of those things is rot, the idea of nature falling into a state of decay. It makes me think of the concept of sin entering the paradisal garden in the Judeo-Christian tradition. The results are the unfortunate rotting away of the good and natural, a smearing of what was intended as it falls away into shambles. It is more evident in Caelid, whereas the Lake of Rot is more directly a deep, dark, and hellish underground scape. The Lake of Rot area finalizes in the contact with Estelle, the most unique, probably, of the bosses in the game. It really cements the cosmic and alien idea into Elden Ring. It suggests the ending, wherein the deific origins of the game are actually cosmic. Space is often associated with gods and deities, but the idea used in Elden Ring is largely Lovecraftian, which is a big inspiration to FromSoft. The Lovecraftian concept is the ultimate subversion of faith in Christian God. Rather than God or deities simply not existing, it is that they do exist, but they do not care for the people of Earth, if they even acknowledge them whatsoever. The Astels reflect these cosmic entities that have seemingly crashed or in some way come into the lands between, but it's not clear immediately what they have to do with the story. Back up on the surface world, we can head to the Caelid Wilds. This area was my favorite of the early game, as being teleported here after being in the Limgrave landscape is such a shock. Caelid is really the ultimate showcase of the rot concept. It is so infected that the creatures and people have transformed into monsters, and the deity that rules over the region is a shell of the powerful god he once was. Radahn is regarded as one of the most powerful of the demigods, and to see him reduced to his condition in this game is very indicative of the power of the rot. In the Christian sense, the hellish and the sinful pollute the world, and tear down the beautiful and the good, and replaced it with disgusting perversions and abominations, and leave the landscape stained scarlet red. FromSoft is really so impressively diverse in the ways in which they can depict bad and evil. The concepts of greed and corruption, of rot opposed to nature, darkness opposed to light, solar and lunar, they completely encompass every side of as many coins as they can manage. Caelid is a strong example of this, as it is both similar to the prior iterations of the Poison Swamp areas, but also a different innovation. It feels unlike any other area in a fantasy or fiction series that I can collect off the top of my head. With all of the lower regions complete, we can ascend to Leyndell, the capital of the lands between. The beautiful fall aesthetic of the Altus Plateau is very unique for From Software as well, and it's very distinctive. The plateau is decided by the Volcano Mountain on one side and the Gilded Capital City on the other. We can address the Volcano Manor first. As an aside, Volcano Manor is the most video game-esque locale with the extreme Nintendo lava and big-headed enemies, but the area itself is less important aside from its fiery and hellish suggestions than Rykard himself. The Praetor has, in search of power, fed himself to an ancient serpent that he may live forever. This is somewhat discussed before, with Gondrick sacrificing his arm to the dragon. In this situation, Rykard has literally allowed himself to be consumed by the ancient creature in exchange for power and the foundation of some perverted family, perhaps like selling one's soul to the serpentine devil. The serpent is considered ancient and eternal, called the God-devouring serpent after it consumes Rykard. This is like the intention of the dragon in Revelation, the ancient dragon whom John identifies as Satan, who pursues the child of the Virgin to devour them. Perhaps there is some relation to this serpent who is devouring the offspring of Marika. Soaring across the Leyndell, we can encounter the picturesque Golden City. It is especially interesting that this false heaven has fallen into disrepair, the absence of its governing council of gods, with only one loyal son remaining. The city and streets of gold in itself reminiscent of illusions of biblical heaven, though it is far from a distinct concept. This is the birthplace of the gods, if you will, the heavens of the angels, where the divine councils themselves meet, at the base of the tree, as in the Tree of Life. The city currently is merely a shade of its former self. This is self-evident in the shade of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, who is not really there, but whose spirit or shade remains to guard his last standing child and the faux magic of the fallen city of gold. Perhaps my favorite cinematic in the game is after the approach to the Grand Throne Room beneath the Great Tree, to find the thrones deserted and only Margit the Fell in the path again. Only it isn't Margit, it's Morgott, the son of Godfrey himself, one of the twin Opens, and Margit was only a combative shade of himself. I find Morgott to be one of the most interesting demigods in the game, personally. He was rejected among his brethren, he and his brother Mohg. They were each born omens, lepers if you recall, sick indicators of the rotten society that were shunned. Yet each of them has a choice, to remain faithful to the Erdtree in spite of their circumstance. Morgott is the good son in this sense, and he does just that, guards the thrones when none of his other siblings can be bothered. When we get to Mohg, this analogy will be more clear, but I feel that the twin omens are, while a classic brother story, representative of the spirits of Michael and Satan. They are the two top angels of God. They find out that they will be serving man, and one of them accepts that, and the other rejects and leads rebellion against him. Mohg is clearly Elden Ring's satanic figure, and we'll resume this story later on when we reach him. Finally, because we've established that Elden Ring is a twisting on archetypal stories, we know that the Erdtree isn't really good, and therefore that doesn't make Morgott good and Mohg bad as in the angelic parallel story, but rather they are both part of a corrupted machine. The path to the Tree of Life is obstructed by the magic of the powers that be, leaving us with only one choice to become Elden Lord: burn it all down. So we are encouraged to venture to the land of the giants, who guard a powerful flaming fire, capable of burning even the Tree of Life that is the Golden Erdtree. Through somewhat of a secret route, we are thrust up, by ancient methods, to a land even higher than the Altus Plateau, the Mountaintops of the Giants. As one might expect for the highest of mountaintops, it is cold and snow-covered terrain. The heights are the dwellings of the ancient giants. This concept reminds me of the semi-traditional idea as seen in such stories as Jack and the Beanstalk, where ascending above the clouds leads one to the land of the giants. The ancient giants, a separate breed and religious concept much like the giants of the Old Testament in Jewish Christian history, the old giants that were on the earth in those days but no longer. When we reach the mountaintops in Elden Ring, the giants have all but died, save for one. The fire giant serves the flame of the felt god, which shows them perhaps in service to another extra entity than the Greater Will, but I admit my knowledge falls short. Another note is that the Nephilim, which are the original giants in the Old Testament, are descended from fallen angels, the both of which are traditionally held to have taught humans the evil arts such as things like fire and war, and this springs to mind when encountering the fire giants of the mountaintops. The battle against the final fire giant is almost like David versus Goliath, when David slays the last or one of the last of an old generation. In Elden Ring, it really is a tragedy that this last monument must be struck down to obtain the means to burn down the Erdtree. The fire will lead us down an irreversible path, so before we do that, we will pay a visit to two special areas pertinent to three of the most powerful remaining demigods. One secret path out of the mountaintops leads to the mysterious Haligtree. The Haligtree appears to be an attempt to imitate and improve the Erdtree, led by the twin demigods Miquella and Malenia. This is another recurring theme in From Software, the attempt to imitate and create that which seems great and true. This, in some essence, is really the intention of humanity itself, trying to imitate what God has created. We can do it our own way, but even better. Perhaps in Elden Ring this cause was truly good and just, and may have been better in the end. We may find out more about Miquella's intentions in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC to assist this point. And indeed we do. Future Creed here to tell us that Miquella's intentions were in fact not pure, which no one could have guessed coming for a From Software character. But Miquella was trying to usurp and do something of his own, and turn himself into the opposite of God, one who restricts free will. We're going to talk about Miquella a little bit more later on. In its current state, the Haligtree may be beautiful, and may have once been successful, but is no longer. At some point, Miquella was kidnapped and has vanished, and Malenia was weakened by the battle with her brother Radahn. During this battle, Malenia seemingly unleashes the Scarlet Rot upon her brother and the land of Caelid to avoid defeat, turning to the dark forces to achieve victory. A shattered warrior, but still the second best combatant under Radahn in his days of glory, Malenia now guards what's left of her brother's achievement, so far as she knows. The second area is more significant to the themes of this video, that being the Mohgwyn Palace and the Shifa River underground. This is where Mohg, the twin omen brother of Morgott, has fled to plot against the Golden Order. In doing so, Mohg becomes the Lord of Blood, his palace and dynasty reflecting thus in its blood-red coloring. Aside from perhaps the Lake of Rot and Caelid, this area is the most hellish, in another way. As we established, Mohg is the satanic rebellious figure. Though all the gods have rebelled against America, Mohg is plotting carefully deep below and out of sight, and making secretive and sly choices to further his goal. His concept of being associated with blood, bloodletting, and the power of fire and blood is particularly interesting imagery, and makes me think of sacrifice and blood offerings, specifically like satanic rituals in this context. The great success of Mohg in this context seems to be his capture of his half-brother Miquella. He has captured the pure of heart god and seeks to corrupt him for his own purposes, the furthering of his dynasty, rebuilding in his own name. By sacrificing blood to Miquella, he seems to make him into a full god and serve as his consort. Future Creed here again. We were right about this point, that he was going to be the consort to Miquella, but just not in the way that we thought. In fact, all of the red imagery, blood imagery, and fire imagery that I'm mentioning is a red herring done by From Software to make us think that Mohg was the satanic figure. But in classic divert your attention fashion, From Software has pulled the rug out from underneath of us and made the satanic figure into a victim of the so-called pure of heart god, who is actually the more corrupt villain, as we'll see when we talk about the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. This opens up another interesting point about Miquella, which may be more addressed in the upcoming DLC, which is his eternal youth. Miquella is blessed or cursed to the eternal form of a child. The concept of eternal youth is very prominent, and the idea of it being an interesting affliction upon a god is also interesting. This is semi-recurring in From Software, such as with Gwendolyn in Dark Souls and with Prince Lothric in Dark Souls 3. Miquella sees his youth as a curse and seeks to undo it, and Mohg interrupts that process for his own gain. Mohg's palace reminds me most of Pandemonium, the kingdom that Lucifer and his fallen angels build for themselves in Hell in Milton's epic Paradise Lost. It is the dynasty established by one fallen, who seeks to create a new order in his own image. Again, since everybody is bad in Elden Ring, Mohg is neither good or bad for trying to do his own thing. With the context of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, Mohg is more good than bad, perhaps. With visits to knock off heaven and then knock off hell out of the way, we're almost ready to proceed to the Frenzied Flame. There is one quick detour with large story implications. A return inspection of the Golden City of Leyndell can reveal a symptom of the darkness that truly underlies it. This is quite literally true. A careful adventurer can stumble down the wrong well and find themselves in the sewers, a dark and disgusting maze that is even deeper than it seems at the outlook. At first, they are mere sewers, where many things dwell, including the dreaded omens which are cast below. Working downward drastically through the horrid sewers can bring one low enough to find a subterranean chapel, a place of worship unknown, guarded by a projection or illusion of Mohg himself. Defeating him seems to do little unless one is diligent enough to discover an additional trick door in the front altar of the chapel, which gives way to a secret passage. Down even further leads the passage. Carefully dropping directly down a massive descent is the way forward. In this area are droves of a mostly deceased merchant people, like the sparse merchants found above ground. At the very bottom of this pit is a mysterious door which can only be opened upon presenting oneself without full armor. This leads to an encounter with the Three Fingers, the heralds of the Frenzied Flame, some supposedly blasphemous flame in opposition to the Two Fingers and the Greater Will. The Frenzied Flame is the embodiment of pure chaos, insanity. When we encounter Shabriri, the one who can lead you to the Frenzied Flame, he exclaims, "May chaos take the world." I'm not going to do an impression. The intention of using the Frenzied Flame as kindling rather than the flame from Melina results in chaos. We can discuss the ending when we get there, but the concept is interesting on its head. Based on some shy lore regarding the merchant peoples, it seems they worshipped and likely summoned the Frenzied Flame and the Three Fingers. They have all gone blind or lost their eyes as a result. Even though we know that the Greater Will is no good guy, the Frenzied Flame seems truly destructive, representative as it is of madness, chaos, insanity, and destruction. This is a prime example of one of FromSoft's strong personifications or anthropomorphizations of archetypal concepts. The idea of chaos incarnate, the opposition of order, is present here. The servants of the Greater Will are called the Golden Order and are indeed orderly and establishment. The Frenzied Flame is simply the opposite, chaos, no order, but the destruction of all order. It is like the element of the Abyss in Dark Souls lore. The Frenzied Flame is worse in some ways, a more threatening and latent evil held deep below, born out of revenge and hatred, the death throe of an entire people group. Finally, we can resume, moving from the depths of darkness back to the tops of the mountaintops. I wonder if we can go even higher. When we kindle the flame atop the mountaintops in the Primal Forge, the Erdtree is indeed set alight, burning. On this action, it is revealed that we need one other thing to truly defeat the true god Meragon. We are teleported through time and space to the unbound city of Faram Azula, an ancient city that was at some point ripped from the rest of the lands between, seemingly by supernatural storms, and cast thereby outside of time. The reason for the city's significance is that it houses a certain beast who, in the service of Queen Marika, stole destined death and hid it away. This is what has led to the lack of death in the lands between, the continual resurrection of the tarnished, and the nature of those who live in death, even the eventual resurrection of the demigods themselves. Destined death must be reenacted to allow for permanence. This is a consistent concept in FromSoft, but also archetypal as well. In Christianity, death is defeated by Christ and removed from the world in place of eternity. Destined death is like a corruption of this concept, almost like the idea of the mark of Cain, that one may walk the earth forever and not die. The idea is especially prevalent in Dark Souls. A brief aside is warranted in discussion of the ancient dragons, which are a big part of Faram Azula, leading up to Dragon Lord Placidusax, who is the Elden Lord of the ancient dragons. The concept again is similar to the previously discussed ancient serpentine symbolism, crossing both wisdom and evil in display. FromSoft almost always has ancient dragons present in their lore, which is also representative heavily of Eastern mythological culture. All cultures tend towards ancient serpents and sea creatures, as do nearly all religions. The implications are not completely clear, but interesting in depiction. Symbolically, there isn't much else to address in Faram Azula, but the significance of the actions involving death and the beast Malekith should not be understated. It is the epitome of death and ancientness. To some extent, it is the inversion of the descent into hell trope. It's an expansion. Of course, you descend into hell and into the depths of earth, as in the typical narrative archetype, as in all From Software games, but you're also ascending into ancientness and into that which is above or over. Ascending into the storm, visiting with the bestial nature and confronting it in order not to overcome death, but to accept it. Finally, after using either ourselves or the maiden as kindling and retrieving destined death, the Erdtree burns. The lands between are cast in a violent red, and the Erdtree is flaming in this deep red as well, as though burning and bleeding. The golden streets of the pseudo-heavenly Leyndell city are reduced to ash. Alas, we are returned, to be granted audience once more with the Erdtree, expecting this time to be admitted through the burnt thorns. Two bumps impede our approach. The first is our former colleague, Sir Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. We haven't yet discussed Gideon. He is seemingly the head of the Round Table, the group of Tarnished who, alongside us, seek the Elden Ring. He is titled as All-Knowing as a descriptor of his pursuit of secret knowledge, secret arts of spells and incantations. Gideon's typing reminds me of occult pursuits, the pursuit of power and secret arts and rituals and things. Secondly, it reminds me of the Lovecraftian mispursuit of knowledge. Lovecraft specifically denotes how this secret knowledge can corrupt and hurt the one who bears it. It may not necessarily be that Gideon himself has been corrupted, but when we encounter him here, it is revealed that he has chosen to be in service to Marika and the Golden Order, seeking to stop us from obtaining Elden Lordship. In his dying breath, after we demolish the stupid spell-spamming range magic build loser with our Mimic tier, he ironically exclaims that he knows a Tarnished could not become Elden Lord. This is interesting, because his faith is at the very least shaken if he feels he needs to stop us before we can even be tested by the tree. It also shows the shortness of his knowledge. Gideon is truly the least knowledgeable person to ever wield this title. Throughout their game we can see him being wrong about things, but rarely more so than this instance. I said in my original video that I thought that Hoarah had become an Elden Lord and then took on the name Godfrey. I was incorrect about that. However, I still think that Gideon was wrong about his knowledge here because we suffer essentially no issues in becoming the Elden Lord upon the defeat of the Elden Beast. Once defeating Gideon, we finally return to the throne room in front of the Erdtree entrance. This time, a hulking figure bearing a full-size spectral lion on his right shoulder kneels before us, holding the corpse of slain Morgott. This Viking reveals himself to be Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. This is the first one to become consort to Marika and father the Golden Lineage, including Godric and Morgott, whom he has just mourned. The first Elden Lord is the image of what Tarnished could achieve. The mantle of victory is displayed in him, so of course he must be defeated to achieve it. Godfrey seems large, in charge, and victorious, but may actually be more of a tragedy than it seems. Once we are beginning to defeat him, he changes his strategy. He kills his golden lion and abandons the Golden Order, and the Elden Lordship even, revealing himself to be Hoarah, the strongest of the Tarnished. Godfrey in Horaloo is the picture of what this achievement would mean if we get it. Horaloo, through his strength, defeated all in his path. He fathered a golden lineage, which has now been all but destroyed. He was seemingly replaced by a second Elden Lord, and now here we are to destroy him once again and seek another replacement of that lordship. It seems a picture of the striving for power which is so futile in its true nature. Obtain the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord. Why? Why perpetuate the Golden Order? Only for the struggle to continue. Of course, we are able to overcome Horaloo, no matter how many times he throws us around like a ragdoll. The first Elden Lord defeated, we can approach the Erdtree itself. Inside, we find the Queen Marika, seemingly imprisoned by the Greater Will. She is released, and shockingly, her hair transforms red, and suddenly the second Elden Lord, Radagon, stands before us. A careful use of incantations before this could have identified the secret to us. Marika and Radagon are one and the same, each of them a god. The nature of Marika and Radagon is really confusing in the game, but represents sort of the complete corruption of the ideal that they had once represented. Nothing we thought we knew is really true, and rather we have been purposefully deceived. The cross-lines nature of this god is interesting and reminds me of this concept in ancient gods like the lasting image of Baphomet, which is modernly consistent with satanic imagery. Baphomet is no clear gender, consisting with the features of both. Merging two sexes, merging humanity and animals, merging nature and man. This creation is something off-putting, something strange, something that we can't understand. Meragon is something unexplainable, able to at once father a lineage with the first Elden Lord, and then as Radagon father children with Rennala, and finally father children in and of itself. I'll talk more about the symbolism present regarding the imagery between male and female used here when we get into the symbolism of duality that threads through the whole game later on in this video. Perhaps there is more to this being than we can understand, and perhaps there are secrets still left uncovered. The approach is clear: defeat Radagon as we have all other challengers. Once we do, he falls before us. Surely we have slain the god and obtained the title of Elden Lord, but in fact, we have not. From the abyssal insides of Radagon spreads a mass of galactic stars, and out of it springs a massive hand which grasps the body of Meragon and transforms it into a golden sword. The implication is clear. Marika and Radagon were merely the tool to be wielded by the thing that rises in front of us now. The inside of this great tree is transformed into something resembling the cosmos, and a draconic dinosaur of starry shape looms over us. This is the Elden Beast, the true thing we must slay, the dragon which guards the final treasure. The Elden Beast brings us back to the Lovecraftian and cosmic theme that Elden Ring has well covered. Being the true form behind Marika and Radagon, Elden Beast is the first and only real god in the game, and he is ambiguous. He is a strange and powerful thing, as any Lovecraftian god, and illustrates again the difference between the truth of Christian God versus the deconstruction that is taking place in Elden Ring. The Elden Beast is a speechless being, apparently sent by an even greater force, arriving much like the other cosmological beings in the game. His motives are unclear, either his or the greater will that may have sent him. Why set up the Golden Order and control it in the way that it did? The question is beyond our understanding. The biggest thing is that this beast is still not beyond the power of our ascended Tarnished, no matter how many times he hits you with rapid golden projectiles. We overcome this god and ascend to the Elden Throne. As with all Soulsborne games, we can choose from multiple endings. We can choose to simply restart the cycle all over again and become slaves to the Golden Order. We can choose to elevate the Golden Order with the apparently brilliant learning of Goldmask and perfecting a version of the Golden Order with even more ordered control. We can choose to end the Golden Order as it stands by cursing the future, preventing fallen souls from returning to the Erdtree, the cursed ending. We can use the Mark of Death to mend the Elden Ring and usher in an age of ash and death, embracing undeath and darkness. We can trust the evil Chaos Force and plunge the world into chaos by the guidance of the flame from the Three Fingers, burning everything and becoming an insane Lord of the Ashes, the ultimate destruction of order entirely. Finally, we can embrace the cosmic and dark knowledge that we discussed in the Liurnia chapter, the age of stars, moon, and cosmos, an age without a lord, becoming the consort of the new goddess Ranni. As the running theme, nobody can really call any of the endings good or bad, because the lands between are in such a complex state that there's no clear correct solution. With the main game pretty much covered, now we can transition into talking about Miquella and Shadow of the Erdtree and the revelations that brings us about this god and his character. From the main game, where we first hear of Miquella the Kind, he is set up to be a messianic figure, the only good son. With his eternal youth, it would seem he has retained his innocence and wants only for the world to be a better place. Whatever his intentions, we know his twin sister Malenia believed in his goal, and they together apparently attempt the Haligtree, an improved version of the Erdtree, so it would seem. But unfortunately, the demonic, Luciferian omen child Mohg has captured the innocent Empyrean and takes him to use him for nefarious purposes. Seemingly, this death, or sleep, has pulled Miquella into the realm of Shadow, a place where Marika has sent unwanted things, and where she herself originally came from. From the realm of Shadow, Miquella calls us, along with other Tarnished, to help him realize his new order, an age of kindness. Upon this venture, we discover vestiges at which Miquella has abandoned parts of himself. These are crosses, bearing the mark of his great rune. The cross and sacrifice symbology is clear. Miquella is sacrificing himself at crosses to rise again as a divine god. The link to the messianic is clear, but is it true? Is it reliable? Our first note might be to examine the facts that the crosses are left there by Miquella, and with them a note about what he left behind. It seems perhaps he is setting us up to see that he is a savior figure, leading us along. When we get close to the Shadow Keep, Miquella finally abandons his great rune, and its shattering leaves many of the other Tarnished that had been alongside us disenchanted. They no longer feel as strongly about Miquella's age of kindness, and are instead searching for answers. If we drop to the depths below the beautiful Cerulean coast, we discover that at the deepest point of the Land of Shadow, Miquella has abandoned a part of himself that one would think he would want to keep, his love. And this is no abstract idea, it is a physical manifestation, Saint Trina herself. This reveal is the second thing that may shake the idea in what has been heard. Miquella, like Marika before him, has a secret second half of the other gender. He's another victim of what I called the Baphomet-like cross-gender perversion in my first analysis video, or the attempt of the alchemical union. His female half is Santrina, and she represents love. Lore items tell us that she provided rest and sleep to all those who were exhausted from Marika's endless cycle of death and rebirth. Perhaps Santrina represented a part of Miquella that was true to the legends, the kindness and the gentleness. But even so, she has been abandoned here. If we allow her to put us to sleep long enough, she will tell us that Miquella is on the wrong path and that we should kill him, affirming this belief. At the final confrontation with Miquella, we see his consort, the resurrected soul of Radahn. But as Mohg's servant Ansbach points out, this is a grotesque thing. Would a kind god truly abscond with the corpse of his relative Mohg and remake it into the prime form of Radahn? It seems not. In the fight with Radahn, we can see an affirmation of an idea we may have already had, that Miquella has the ability to steal hearts, or rather change a person's free will. It seems that this is what Miquella has done to us Tarnished, and why they begin to feel disenchanted when his great rune breaks and the power of his heart seal weakens. It is also likely that this is what he has done to Radahn himself. This is not entirely agreed upon, but based on the fact that Miquella sends Malenia to kill Radahn in order for his soul to be transported to Miquella in the Land of Shadow, it seems like Radahn is unwilling. If Miquella could communicate with Radahn, he could simply voluntarily take his own life and provide his soul for a cause he believed in, but he does not. So it is that Miquella the Kind is a lie, a deceit. Though his intentions may even be pure, his methodology is not. In many ways, Miquella is actually an anti-Christ figure, even more like Lucifer, as some of my many commenters pointed out in my previous Elden Ring video. Miquella is disguised as an angel of light and kindness. He is covered in a veil of youth and innocence that seems to hide his true nature. If his intentions are even slightly impure, it means he is seeking after divinity, even higher than lordship, and to replace the current order as god. He is the Luciferian usurper. His death and resurrection in divinity are then more like the fake and phony resurrection that is prophesied regarding the Antichrist and the false prophet in Revelation. It's interesting to consider Miquella's curse of eternal youth, if you will. It seems tame when compared to the curses imparted to Mesmer and Malenia. I can't quite put my finger on the narrative theme of portraying him this way outside of its deceptiveness. His emasculated and even effeminate nature, combined with his youthfulness, remind me of both Gwyndolin from Dark Souls 1 and Lothric from Dark Souls 3. This archetype is not cement, but in this instance it really seems to convey only a deceptive mask. The kindness of a child is a terrifying mask for evil intentions. Or, possibly, Miquella really only has the mind of a child or at least an adolescent, and in his naivete, he believes he can heal the world with kindness and does not see the folly of his actions. Another interesting thing to note is the misappropriation of Mohg's archetype. If Miquella's archetype is a deception, then I have no reason to believe that Mohg's isn't also. What if, instead of Satan, Mohg represents the true salvation? Mohg was aware of the Golden Order's folly and was seeking to establish his own dynasty. Is it possible that this was the dynasty that would have been best? Perhaps Mohg represented the salvation that would come in even the lowliest forms, like a leper, like Jesus coming as a lowly man and being among the lepers and the persecuted. I'm slow to take this approach due to Mohg's communion with an outer god of blood, but it's also possible that this is a deception related to Miquella as well. But if so, it's interesting to think that if Mohg's ending could have been the good ending. Everyone debates what the true good ending of Elden Ring is because they're all so ambivalent. Perhaps the good ending does not exist, because it has been stolen by Miquella in his destruction of Mohgwyn. But that's just a theory, a game theory. All in all, Miquella's intentions may be pure, but he represents the idea of godhood that we all can see to be false, ruling over mindless servants. It is the same end as creating robots to worship oneself. They have no other choice. If there is no conflict, no choice, no will other than Miquella's, and that is the thing that stops the fighting, the death, the hurt, and the pain, is it really worth it? It seems that Elden Ring, via the story of Miquella, has actually answered the Theodicy for all of us theological philosophers. Everyone right now is identifying Miquella as the true villain of Elden Ring. We can see here that a world void of pain for the love of kindness is no world at all, given that the kindness is the result of force. You may have noticed over the course of the analysis that there is a recurring theme and a strongly recurring idea, and that is of twos, twins, pairs, reflection, and duality. As I've mentioned, From Software's work in general likes to examine things in very direct themes. Dark Souls makes use of primordial elements like fire and ice, darkness and light, chaos and order. And many of these things are also present in Elden Ring, where the duality and opposition of them is strongly explored. Elden Ring is practically obsessed with things in twos. Every element is a coin having two sides. You can see this in the frequency of twins, in the two fingers, in overworlds and underworlds, in the Erdtree and its shadow. No thing exists that does not either have a counterpart or an opposite. In my opinion, this narrative choice is an expression of the necessity of duality. Light cannot exist without darkness, nor order without chaos, nor pleasure without pain, nor good without evil. Let us examine how these themes present themselves in Elden Ring and its DLC, and how they tie into ancient narrative themes as presented in literature, religion, and mythology. Perhaps the most fundamental expression of duality is in darkness and light. The expressions of the visual aspects of light and darkness are often used as wholly representative of other oppositional concepts like good and evil. We can say light and darkness while meaning good and evil. That doesn't always mean they are conflated that way, but traditionally they are. Light is bright and pure, sometimes conflated with the purity of the color white, but in Elden Ring, the pure light is conflated with the color gold. This is also not uncommon. Here on Earth, gold is viewed as the most valuable of metals because of its rarity. When referring to things categorically, gold is most often used of the highest achievable thing. Think gold, silver, then bronze metals, for example. The Golden Order of Elden Ring is using it in this sense then, considering themselves of the highest achievement. The light of the game is then used in the Leyndell area, the home bathed in rays of gold, the city of heaven that I mentioned. It is symbolic of the golden Elden Ring and of the golden incantations used by the faithful and of the golden hair of Queen Meragon. We will talk about the use of the White Queen and Red King duality, but we can see that in this way, Elden Ring is subverting the white light in sense of purity and replacing it with gold. The Gold Queen rather than the White Queen, then. This is alchemical, as we'll get into. The opposite of this gold is actually not present in the main game, really. In Smotown's video, he cites the opposite of the golden as actually being the moon and the cosmos. In many respects, he's absolutely right, but I think that the moon and space imagery is more so the opposite of order and of masculinity, as we'll discuss. Thanks to Elden Ring's DLC, we know that the opposite of the golden Erdtree is actually the dark Shadow Tree. The duality of golden rays of lights is the casting of dark shadows. It is not complete abyssal darkness necessarily, but simply the obfuscation of the golden light. Even the Shadow Tree itself has gold within it, but it is obfuscated by the oppressing black of the shadow. Perhaps stronger than the concept of light and darkness is the duality of chaos and order. Chaos and order, I would say, is actually the main theme of most of FromSoft's repertoire, especially Elden Ring. Gold is also the representation of order, being the golden order. It is overt order, even though we know that the order is corrupt and flawed. It seeks a total subjugation, a set of very specific rules to be followed, and a clear laying out of what everyone should do. The alternative to this order is really to be found in a few possibilities. After all, even when discussing duality, one thing can have a set of things that may be considered opposite or antonym to it. For example, consider God as he is present in Christianity. That is, loving God. What is then his opposite? Well, the opposite of an all-powerful and all-loving God would be a completely powerless and non-existent emotional abyss of nothingness, much like the deep waters at the beginning of creation. But so too would a partial opposite to him be a powerful God that has no love for anything, or rather is completely impartial to life altogether, such as H.P. Lovecraft's concept of elder gods. So what is the opposite of order? Well, it certainly is chaos, but chaos manifests itself in several ways in Elden Ring, in the many oppositions to the Golden Order, the many renditions of chaos. The most straightforward and true chaos is that of the Frenzied Flame, abandoning to the dualistic two fingers for the blasphemous three, cleansing the realm in a violent fire to the chant of "May chaos take the world." It's the Heath Ledger Joker mentality, burn everything down just for the sake of burning. It's pure and wretched chaos, emotionless, meaningless, and unordered. Chaos takes another form though traditionally as well. Order and chaos are commonly depicted as the masculine and the feminine, and this depiction of duality is perhaps the most recurring. Masculine and order are associated with light and sun, and femininity and chaos are often associated with darkness and the moon and stars. Obviously, we can see some versions of this traditional contrast in Elden Ring. The feminine is clearly portrayed through the matriarchs of the Carian family and the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Rennala is called the Queen of the Full Moon, and Ranni's quest brings about the Age of Stars and the Dark Moon. Both this ending and the Frenzied Flame ending represent different forms of chaos triumphing over order. Masculinity and femininity also present themselves in the traditional depiction of the Red King and the White Queen. Obviously, that is the relationship between Radagon and Marika. The Red King is the warrior spirit of uncontrollable masculinity, strength, and fire. The White Queen is the careful but dangerous spirit of chaotic femininity, deception, and callousness. The goal of life is in many ways to merge these halves together. Jungian psychology calls this the merging of the ego and the shadow. In alchemy, this is the ultimate achievement or the great work. The reconciliation of the White Queen and the Red King becomes the alchemical rebus, called the divine hermaphrodite. It reflects the fact that both the masculine and the feminine, both the chaos and the order, are meant to be combined together to be used correctly. To take a brief detour into faith, this would traditionally be done through the process of marriage. A man and a woman marry to bring out the best in each other and make up for each other's flaws and shortcomings. The false sense of this is the alchemical, trying to pervert physical processes to force the two halves together into a perverted union of the rebus. Earlier in the video, I've compared the divine hermaphrodite to truly being the anti-divine Baphomet, which is a demonic corruption. I think in many ways Elden Ring shows this to be true, with the tension and quarrel between Marika and Radagon. Their union is somehow flawed, along with all the other unions in the game, though we don't know exactly how or why. Many lore content creators speculate that Radagon and Marika fight for control of the vassal body to enact their own schemes. Their unholy union also results in their children being cursed. There's no better time than now to segue into the duality of the children and family members, which also reflect the dual themes of chaos and order. So the children of Marika and Radagon, which make up the first and final generations, are all cursed. They all re-reflect the White Queen and Red King duality, and at least one of them are twins, which again recalls the dualistic concept. There is debate and speculation about the first generation of demigods and whether they are certainly the first and certainly siblings, but I find the evidence to support this, and I tend to agree with Smotown's opinions on the lineage. In any event, this generation is that of Mesmer and Melina. Shadow of the Erdtree calls Mesmer's sister younger, though this could still mean that they are twins. Mesmer bears the red hair of Radagon, showing himself to be a reflection of the Red King, and Melina, interestingly, has hair that is somewhat red and somewhat blonde or white looking. She could reflect a proper merge between the two, but it's not clear. It's also possible that she had Marika's blonder hair before committing her sin against the Erdtree as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, or something along those lines. Both of these siblings have curses that seem to take form in their opposite eyes. Again, two eyes in two siblings, seemingly a reflection of duality. We do not know the nature of Melina's curse. Mesmer's curse results in him being one with an entity known as the Lightless Abyssal Serpent, some serpentine representation of darkness. The abyss is usually associated with darkness and chaos, so it's interesting that it is merged in this way with the orderly reflection of Radagon that is Mesmer. This is the first occurrence of another duality trope of obedience versus rebellion. Mesmer is the obedient son of Marika, a mama's boy, if you will, who does her bidding even if it expels him to the land of shadow to bear the hatred that should be directed towards her. Melina is the rebellious daughter, who leads a godskin rebellion against the gods with some other plan in mind. This trope will recur later. The other children of Marika and Radagon's union is the final generation, Miquella and Malenia. These two are explicitly mentioned to be twins. They are both cursed, and their curses even seem opposite in nature. Miquella has eternal youth, and Malenia has eternal decay. Miquella actually steals the White Queen nature with a gentle, innocent, and effeminate nature, whereas Malenia robs the Red King with a violent and defensive masculine nature, even devoting herself to the defense of Miquella. Another interesting note is that each of these siblings also shares a second duality split. Miquella is another straightforward hermaphrodite, having a female half of Saint Trina. Saint Trina seems to represent love and care, whereas Miquella is less feeling and more apathetically logical, perhaps even naive. Malenia also seems to share a second nature, being the Rot goddess. Many item descriptions seem to portray a Rot goddess or an outer god of Rot that has come to dwell within Malenia. This is most similar to Mesmer's curse, where he has a specific deity that seems to be its own deity that also dwells within him. We do not know if there is a second nature to Melina, but it's certainly possible it could be the Gloam-Eyed Queen or something like that. To increase the duality even further, the middle generations of demigods seem to be dual castes of one another. The first is the Golden lineage, the children of Godfrey and Marika, who seem to reflect the White Queen, the Orderly, and obviously the Golden. The second is Radagon's lineage, the children of Radagon and Rennala, which seems to reflect more the Red King and the Violent. At least, Rykard and Radahn fall into this category. Ranni and even Rennala are almost anomalous, as Ranni appears to be the wisest and most conniving of the demigod children, aside from maybe Miquella. It is reasonable to say that she is one of the most important children. Elden Ring almost seems to be saying that the Red King desires more so to be with the Blue Queen, the Chaos Queen of Night and Moon. I can't quite put my finger on the implications of this, but it is interesting that the middle lineage seems better or more stable in many ways than the cursed children of Meragon. Think of Godwyn the Golden, well-beloved, and Radahn the noble lion hero. Somewhere in the Golden lineage, though, emerges two more accursed twins, Morgott and Mohg. They are the stereotypical dual reflection of the idea I mentioned earlier, obedience and rebellion. This is fundamentally the story of Michael and Satan, and the traditional brotherly feud archetype in general, such as the prodigal son. One child chooses to stay loyal to the family, to the parents, to the order, no matter what. The other child rebels, leaves, and does not accept his place in the world. Regardless of whether the cause is right in this case, the archetype is still fundamental. In some ways, this sets up another form of opposition to order, which is blasphemy. In many ways, this is the opposite of extreme order, the opposites of the extremes. Goldmask's quest reflects the ideal of striving for perfect order, a refinement of the orderly concepts into absolute perfection. The recusants of Rykard, then, are kind of the opposite of this. Rykard, in choosing to literally forsake himself for the power of the rival force of the Ancient Serpent, commits blasphemy against the Order. It is perfect rivaling to the Order, seeking to completely forsake it. The recusants hunt the Tarnished, to simply and deliberately stop the plans of the Golden Order from going forward. Another element of the duality that is present is the concept of the copy of oneself. Another element of duality that is present is the concept of the copy of oneself. You can see this in the presence of twins, but more primarily in the presence of shades. Morgott takes on the form of Margit, a shade of him which is an Omen warrior. A shade of Godfrey guards the capital, a shade of Mohg guards the Frenzied Flame, a shade of ourselves can be found in the Mimic tier where we make a copy of ourselves that helps us. This theme is something like reflection. Everything occurs in two parts, the plane and the reflection. Aside from just shades, characters also tend to have dual or hidden identities. Godfrey takes on the name Horalu, Malekith parades as Gronk, the Beast Clergyman, Ranni appears as Renna, Radagon is Marika, and Elden Beast, Centrina is Miquella. It just seems like everyone is hiding part of their identity, and it is very obfuscated. It again reminds me of the Jungian psychology concept, the idea of two identities, one which presents itself and one which is hidden. In addition to this, Empyreans and important figures in the game also get a shadow companion in the form of a beast, sort of like their animal half. This is not far from the idea of a familiar. Marika has the beast Malekith, Ranni has Blythe, and Godfrey has Siraj. We see many more forms of duality along the way as well. We have intelligence and faith, which, as I said in my last video, almost seems to reflect the masculine and the feminine, the day and the night. It is similar to the fire and water duality, which we see in the contrast between Liurnia and Gelmir. We have the overworld and the underworld, being able to ascend to the highest of mountaintops and descend to the lowest lake of rot in the underworld. We have life and death, the concept of death within life, shown in the Godwinian result of those who live in death, the undead. Elden Ring is obsessed with the nature between these extremes. I think that's why it takes place in the lands between. It deals with extremes and the in-between. The question it seems to pose is whether extremes can be reconciled. Marika and Radagon seem to be a failed or corrupted union. Miquella seems to forsake the unity with his sister for his obsession with his half-brother Radon, who he takes as consort instead. But the better things of Elden Ring are the proper reconciliations. Radagon and others study the combinations of both faith and intelligence to combine their power. The Sword of Night and Flame is a great showcase of this, as is Renalla's sister Rellana, who uses twin swords of Night and Flame magics. The Duskborn ending succeeds only when it combines life and death, not choosing one over the other. It seems that if any of the most powerful demigods could simply combine their natures with one another, they would succeed, if they could only combine with another partner. The best results occur from Miquella and Malenia, who combine their natures the best, until Miquella's plan seems to bring them apart from one another. Elden Ring ponders the alchemical objective of the unification of chaos and order in a mythological format. It illustrates the ways in which this methodology ultimately fails. At the core of the story is a family that has fallen apart. Nearly no brothers or sisters remain together, merely fighting each other for power. Each of the sets of parents have fought and abandoned one another, and they are all pawns of a greater will, some unseen force that they can only hope to serve. I can't say what specifically Elden Ring is trying to say with the symbology of twos and pairs and duality, but I can't help but think that things would be so much better if they were unified, and Elden Ring seems to think so too. Here's your happy ending. Perhaps a ceasing of the endless striving for power, and instead a desire for wholeness as a family. But then again, we wouldn't have our story. Elden Ring draws a drastic picture of dramatized themes: order and chaos, perpetuity and endings, life and death, omens and signs, light and darkness, fire and ice, blood and ritual, family and power, heights and depths, good and evil, ancient and new, and everything that, well, lands between. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed this compilation of my fire videos that's kind of been pushed together, edited in some ways, and updated to match the things. I haven't changed my opinions all that much, but I still think that this video is really important, and it's one of my favorites that I've ever done, and it's obviously one of your favorites as well. So I hope you enjoy this remaster. If it's your first time listening, I hope you enjoy it as well, and I hope you consider sticking around with the channel. I do, in the very near future, have an upcoming video that is going to be similar to this one, but it focuses on another From Software title, one which I mentioned quite a bit in this video, and you can probably guess what it will be. That should be out soon, so I hope that you'll stick around for that. I hope that you'll comment, like, subscribe, and let me know what you think I can do better in the future. Again, this has been Credence Questions, and I appreciate your time.